Fire Emblem has 8 fighters in Smash, 8 anime sword fighters. That puts them only under the Mario series for total reps and on par with Pokemon. Unless of course you count Pokemon Trainer as multiple, in which case they have the most. That still does beg the question though, why does a series that was virtually unknown in every country other than Japan until 4 console generations in, get so many fighters in one of, if not the biggest, crossovers in history? I think it comes down to one of two things, so let's take a look at each character and see where they each came from. Fire Emblem started on the Famicom in Japan in 1990, with Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light. Its central lord and main character was, of course, Marth. Sakurai has made no secret that he has a fondness for the series, and I've heard rumors that he even considered Marth for the original Smash Bros. On the N64, so it was a no-brainer to include him in the game's sequel. What was not so obvious was whether to let him in versions of the game where Fire Emblem had never been localized, other than as some niche anime that a few collectors had VHSs of in their basements. Ultimately, they decided to leave him in, because why not include a character that was already programmed into the game? Why not Tatsunoko vs. Capcom? This was a decision that would change the fate of Fire Emblem, leading to people becoming curious about the series and an English localization of FE7, The Blazing Blade, being announced not too long after. It probably also didn't hurt interest that Marth was considered one of the best in Melee, and the character has not missed a game since. Of course, Marth wasn't the only Fire Emblem representative to appear in Melee. While he would show up in several sequels and remakes of the original Famicom title, he was considered old news and Nintendo wanted a character from the latest title to promote this one, thus the inclusion of Roy, from the Binding Blade, soon to be released on the Game Boy Advance. In Melee, he played very similarly to Marth, being a bit slower, but most of his attacks being on fire. He was considered not as good as Marth, and much like how he was included as the new hotness in Melee, he was dropped in favor of the newest FE protagonist next game. When Smash 4 came along, however, and introduced the Smash Ballot, a way for fans to voice who they most wanted as DLC for the game, some of the most popular choices were past characters who'd been previously dropped, and no surprise, Roy was one of them. And then with the inclusion of Smash Ultimate's mission statement of everyone is here, that brings us to Roy's current situation. And then for the man who replaced Roy. It's the guy who goes from puberty to mountain of a man with the press of an X or Y, Ike himself. When Brawl came out, the latest Fire Emblem game was Path of Radiance, and Ike was included to represent the title. Unlike Roy, he was given his own unique moveset, with Marth using his sword Falchion in an almost dance-like style, and Ike swinging around his blade Ragnell like a damn club, beating his opponents as if he were using a blunt instrument rather than a blade. Perhaps his more unique playstyle, and the fact that, unlike many FE Pro tags, he stuck around for a second game, Radiant Dawn, left them as a more permanent feature in not only Smash, but in the Fire Emblem fanbase as a whole. Of course, that said, Fire Emblem would soon face problems. While both Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn are now considered classics and go for nice chunks of change on eBay, they're also the poorest selling Fire Emblem games to be offered internationally, with the latter moving just under 500,000 units. There could be a lot of reasons for this, perhaps because the GameCube didn't perform as well as some of Nintendo's other consoles, chief among them the Wii, which the sequel was on. Imagine expecting Radiant to sell well when a lot of the Wii's user base didn't even own the system that previous game was featured on, even including some light interactivity between the games. In addition to that, Radiant Dawn played a lot differently than previous entries in the series, and due to some quirk with localization, there was a lot of confusion with the different difficulty settings. It seemed like the game was set up to fail. Regardless of the circumstances, Nintendo wasn't pleased with the way things were going, and the series was on the chopping block, with Intelligent Systems having just one more chance to bring things back from the brink. That chance was spent on what was meant to be a love letter to the series, a final hurrah as a thank you to the fans, and also a new beginning, in the hopes that this would not be the ending of Fire Emblem, but a resurgence, and boy did it pay off. This was not only the first title to break 1 million units in sales, but it also went on to move over 2 million. Even with all those copies in circulation, it's still a collector's item, and you'll be lucky to find a used one at its original retail price. As to why this happened, there are many theories, and it's worth looking into videos explaining the circumstances surrounding Awakening, but that's not what this video is about. If I can interject a bit of my personal feelings into this is my favorite Fire Emblem title, but again, this isn't the time. Right now we're talking about Smash. Awakening was a massive triumph of intelligent systems, of its fans, and most notably, Fire Emblem as a whole, so it was only appropriate that this game got a character into Smash 4. But who? Should it be the Avatar, the player's customizable portal into that world? Should it be Chrom, the prince of a fantasy nation who still manages to be a personable everyman beloved by all, who much of the story revolves around and carries around the titular Fire Emblem itself as a shield? Or should we go back to the beginning? To the original main character, Marth, or at least the one claiming to be the legendary Hero King, taking on his name, his blade, and wearing a mask to obscure the truth. This character was plastered all over the promotional art for Awakening, celebrating the series' origins, and giving the title a mysterious allure that you just had to play the game to figure out who this person was. Then, once the truth is finally revealed, you're introduced to one of the core mechanics of Awakening that makes this title so unique and had some players studying spreadsheets to determine exactly what choices they should make throughout the game. At this point, it should go without saying that when a promo was dropped that had Captain Falcon going toe-to-toe with Lucina, Fire Emblem fans, if not the internet in general, lost their collective minds. She was truly the perfect choice to include in Smash 4, with the only real disappointment being that she played almost identical to Marth. I have heard whisperings that it was originally planned to give her a unique moveset, but that compromises needed to be made due to time constraints. These days, many consider her better than the one she's an echo of due to her consistency, but it does leave one yearning for a rep with a more unique playstyle. Remember that Avatar character I mentioned earlier? In Awakening, you could customize their gender, their appearance, and even what stats they excel in. Remember that trailer with Captain Falcon and Lucina? Well, she wasn't the only character reveal in it, not even the only Fire Emblem character reveal. Just when things were looking dicey, Lucina got some help from above in the form of the magic swordsman, Robin. With this character, Sakurai and his team really got to flex their creative muscles by having a fighter that used both spells and a sword, which was also imbued with magic to give it a bit of an extra shock. In addition, to reference Fire Emblem's weapon durability system, each of these moves had limited uses. If you used Arc Fire or the variable Thunder Tomes, you would toss them. Too many swings of the Levin Sword and you would have to make do with a bronze one instead. Each of these would respawn after a time, but if you weren't careful, you would be caught in a situation where you didn't have all of your tools, worst case, being left off stage without your third jump, Elwyn, to return. All this led to you needing to plan your battle a bit more, which was the perfect way to implement the strategist Robin. Together with Lucina, this was a terrific celebration of Fire Emblem Awakening, a game that was itself a celebration of the Fire Emblem series and saved it from the trash heap. Now, doing this a bit out of order, but again, do you remember the Lucina, Captain Falcon, and Robin trailer? And do you remember Robin's final smash as well as some of their victory screens? There was one more Awakening character that was a part of them, and he's the other one that I mentioned previously, Chrom. In the trailer, he's shown lying on the ground, defeated, being defended by Lucina, and at the end, he laments this situation, saying, "I suppose I'll get my chance. Another day." In Robin's final smash, he comes in to lend support in a pair-up attack like in Awakening. When Robin wins, Chrom will sometimes be there standing side by side to show his support. All of this led to players asking, why not Chrom? He very clearly wants to be in the game, and the character model is already there after all. Well, it's not quite that simple, but the Smash team took it to heart and he made it to Ultimate. I imagine they made him an Echo to speed things along, but still made him at least a little different by making him a combination of Roy and Ike, and adding some win hitboxes to a few of his moves. All signs point to his inclusion being due to fan demand though. Now we get to DLC, because Roy only half counts. Most of the DLC for Smash 4 seems to be due to fan requests from the Smash ballot. The last three were especially hype, with Cloud and Bayonetta being the most requested characters that were not Goku or Shrek. There was one odd choice, however, with the inclusion of Corrin. Awakening had brought Fire Emblem back from the brink and made the series wildly successful for Nintendo. The next game was ambitious, perhaps too ambitious, including 3 different versions and a massive script that would have probably qualified as a series of novels. Fates was on the horizon, and Nintendo wanted one of their most recent original characters in Smash to keep the game modern and relevant. Of course, both Fates and Splatoon were released in 2015, so one has to wonder if maybe Nintendo was just worried that Fire Emblem might just dip right back down if they didn't actively promote the latest release. But regardless, Corrin was announced for Smash 4 not long after their game dropped, the character likely having been planned long before Fates released. This one had a few scratching their heads, and some did complain that the number of Fire Emblem reps outweighed their popularity, but with their chainsaw-esque sword, pointy dragon limbs, and anime sword fatigue not quite setting in just yet, there weren't as many dissenters as we'd see later on. Also, with what Corrin was sandwiched between, there was enough hype to cover up any disappointment that might have been seen at any other point in Smash's history. So that brings us to the final character on our list, the last Fire Emblem character to be included in Smash Ultimate. Up until this entry, some people had found the number of inclusions a little weird, but it had not reached critical mass. People considered Marth, Roy, and Ike classics. They liked the idea of Robin, Lucina, and Chrom in Smash, and with Corrin, it depended on who you asked. With Smash Ultimate bringing in everyone, now you're up to 7, with 4 of them having very similar movesets, and it all seemed a little much, to put things nicely. And then came Byleth. Poor sweet Byleth. Byleth is a classic example of being at the wrong place at the wrong time. If they had somehow time traveled into Melee, if they'd been the replacement of an older character, if they had saved their entire franchise, their presence here would have been welcome. That last point is especially sad, given that Three Houses is currently the best-selling Fire Emblem game and will likely continue to move units. Instead, however, they came into Smash as another anime sword fighter in one of the series with the most characters included. Never mind that their sword also functions as a whip, that they have an axe, bow, and lance. They're just another dumb Fire Emblem blue-haired protagonist. The reasoning seems pretty straightforward. Nintendo wanted to promote the latest game in the series and knew that Smash would help. This is a bit ironic, given that by the time they dropped, Three Houses had already broken sales records and even been the winner of the Player's Choice at that year's Game Awards. When Byleth was decided upon, Three Houses wasn't even finished, so they couldn't have known that, so in they went, even though by that point, the game didn't need any help being a huge success. So where does that leave us? We have 8 Fire Emblem characters in Smash, or as some will call them, 8 anime sword fighters. Marth was put in as the figurehead of the franchise, but the rest seem to be included for 2 reasons. The first is player demand. Chrom and the re-inclusion of Roy are the main examples, but would also put in Lucina and Robin. Awakening had been out for a few years and already made its mark, so I'm including them in this bracket due to the game's popularity. The second is for promoting the latest Fire Emblem. Roy, again, falls under this category due to when he was originally included. For the rest, we have Ike, Corrin, and Byleth. That makes it a pretty even split between player enjoyment and Nintendo trying to sell us something. Of course, many will still probably say that they think the series is overrepresented, to which I have something else for them to consider. Many of Nintendo's properties get only 1 game per system, if they're lucky. Gomen, Falcon Tencho. A few core series though get multiple, the ones coming to mind being Mario, The Legend of Zelda, Pokemon, Kirby, and now Fire Emblem. Mario has 9 fighters, with Pokemon and Fire Emblem having 8, Zelda 6, and Kirby 3. If anything, I'd argue that the last 2 are underrepresented, rather than Fire Emblem being over. Back on the GBA, Fire Emblem had 3 games, then went back to 1 for GameCube and Wii, then 3 more for 3DS, and now has 2 mainline and 2 spin-off games on Switch, and 1 massively profitable mobile game. So like it or not, it has gone from obscure to niche to mainstream, and the number of characters in Smash seems to go hand in hand with this. Hopefully, if this trend continues, we get an axe user next time, but I believe that Fire Emblem's representation is deserved, and if anything, it makes me wonder why Zelda and Kirby aren't equally prevalent. What series does seem overrepresented, in my opinion, is Kid Icarus. For a while, I thought it had 3 fighters with only 2 games, until I remembered that there was a Game Boy title that everyone always forgets about. You know, I actually wrote this script out ages ago and never got around to recording it. Probably why we're talking about such an old topic. Anyway, I didn't really have anything else ready for this week, so I figured I'd finally clear this one out of my unused topics folder and just talk about some of the more contentious roster choices in Smash. Of course, I wasn't in the room for any of these discussions, so some of this was speculation, but what do you think? Do you think 8's too many reps for Fire Emblem? Would more varied movesets have helped? Or do you think all the echoes make things more acceptable, since those require less resources? And who do you main in Smash? As for me, you shouldn't even need to ask. You know exactly who I'm pot-shotting you with from across the stage. Anyway, that'll do it for this video, so thanks for watching and maybe consider subscribing if you enjoyed it. For everlasting peace. Wait, should I still be saying that when I'm taking a break from Mega Man this week?